All right, we're on officially. Welcome everybody, and welcome back, Johannes. Johannes, as we like to tease, is the weirder philosopher on the internet, and I've really just enjoyed, actually, after reading Heidegger on my own for years and years and years, right, and not knowing anyone else that really understood Heidegger, having met you and being able to talk about this stuff has just been really has been just awesome. So I love all of our conversation. I get a lot of really good feedback every time you're on the channel. And you're also started doing courses on the internet, and I've taken a couple of them, and I actually think, whether or not this was your intention or not, I actually think that you're in some way you're innovating a new way of doing things as a philosopher, and because it seems like what you're offering are things that are, I mean, I don't know if it can get any less instrumental, right, and useful or practical than philosophy. I mean, almost by definition, philosophy isn't that. And so you're let's see, are you still there, or you look a little frozen? So we're having a few technical difficulties, just so for people who are watching, internet's a little spotty, apparently in London, and I'm in a new place. I'm at an Airbnb in Santa Barbara on the ocean and I have a bunch of rugrats running around. So we may get disturbed on many different levels with the video. So I'll just pause it. And so, but the recording may be a little choppy, but we'll make do with what we got. Well, I think what I was saying is I actually think that whether or not I don't think this was your intention, but you making these offerings on the internet and teaching online, yeah, right, is, as I was saying, that on one level, it's people who are taking something that probably is by definition the least immediately useful or instrumental, right? And that sense, yeah, philosophy by definition is that realm in which it's what, yes, it addresses what has things show up such that they're useful in the first place, right? Yeah. So that you're getting such a good response and such good feedback on this, I think is showing that you're one of the rare places where people can start to, like, and it's the closing window, I think, in my view, of where people can come and actually learn and discuss and have their minds blown about things that have no immediate, for its own sake, in a certain sense. And I have a sense, yes, that what you're doing is quite innovative that way.
Yes, thank you. I mean, it's going back. So the one of the courses you were in was the Heidegger course on death and being. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think you had time for some of the seminars too. The course that starts next week is on Nietzsche, and it will run for 7 weeks. Mm-hmm. And I'll give anyone who listens on this channel the same as, mm-hmm, on mine. If people enroll now, they can get 50% off. So we can leave something maybe just down below in the comments. Mm-hmm. So they can enroll on this platform that I'm using. And I had a couple of things on what you just said. I had a conversation with Josh Hochschild. I think that's how you pronounce it. It's actually a German name, Hochschild. I think his family's from Frankfurt. He's American. He teaches at the Catholic college, liberal arts college. He teaches in a very classical style. So it's about teaching. He said to me, "You're on the edge of, on the cutting edge of what's possible online." And I don't know. That was not the intention that I had, obviously. There was the only intention that I had was I want to teach. That's all I know, right? And so that's why I started the channel, and just to be able to give the lectures in the way that I want to. Some of the stranger ones attracted you, which should be quite telling. The horrible audio quality, video was even worse. Not even speaking of the content, of course. Just, but yeah. So and then it over the course of the last 2019, actually, it got some traction. And then people started signing up for, Patreon, or some even, came for and wanted to talk to me for about, one of them for more than half a year spoke with me for about 6 hours every month. And the academy I'm building, it's got two light motifs, if you like. One of them is a quote from Schelling, the German philosopher, which is this: learn only in order to create. But he says the full quote is this: all rules for study are summed up in this one: learn only in order to create. And that's why, there are no credentials, there's no pieces of paper, even though that would be, could be quite funny to have sort of a fake certificate or something. But it is completely non-instrumental. Yes, it's free from any demands in that regard. There's nothing attached to it. There's certainly no prestige that comes with it. You cannot gain status, but what happens. One of the things, for example, is what's come out of the two courses. One of them on idleness with dignity. That's also very important. Right? The motto. The other leitmotif is otium cum dignitate, idleness with dignity, which is another way of saying, an old Latin saying from Cicero. It just means that there is you can still earn dignity in a non-instrumental environment. And what it's led to, for example, with someone who's taken both courses now, he's found his lifetime writing project that he wants to write on through the courses. Someone else always apparently for years and years and years wanted to read philosophy, had bought all the books, but as you know, it's a bit overwhelming sometimes. And he's now gone from taking the courses to becoming a private student, and we go through his writings together. He writes essays, and I give him comments on those essays. And it's probably going to develop into a longer piece, this time actually than on Nietzsche, on the tragic existence in Nietzsche. And that's something that comes out of this. But it's purely for, because people find, I don't know why, but people find it within themselves. They want to write. I mean, I know why. I need to do it myself. I write all the time, right? I've written this extremely strange poem here, From Tree to Tree, which I recorded a couple of weeks ago. I wrote this in February, and it just comes out. And I think once you kind of divide it from the instrumental, it becomes something where it perhaps should have been anyways. It's free. It's a free endeavor, and it's peripatetic in that sense, right? It's taking a walk together in thinking, rather than wanting. One of the strangest things you have to do at university is you have to give learning outcomes at the beginning of a seminar. I don't know what that's, there's no learning outcome. There's not a factory. And someone asked recently, what about amor fati in Nietzsche? And how can we apply this? So someone asked us in a live stream. I said, no. There's no application. It happens in thinking it through. And as you think it, you become it, right? You become this way of thinking.
Yeah, totally. And it's like, there's a sense in which, I mean, this is actually, you contributed a chapter. I just got done finishing my chapter finally on our anthology with Vervaeke and Chris, and about dialogos. But one of the things I did was I really, and I had no idea I was going to write to such a degree about nihilism, right? But once I started writing about it, it became what I really saw in a deep way, how it was underlying everything in a way that nihilism itself couldn't account for. And that's what strikes me as unique about what you're doing, is that it's showing, one, that there's that as far as we know, right, human beings through thought, right, are the one way in which you can access the world as such, and to philosophize and to think that way is, and in some sense, saying it's saying, which is something that's really disappearing, the sense of that there's a being and an intelligence in being, and that there's a way to listen, that thinking is a kind of listening and perceiving that acknowledges that there's something hidden, and that thinking, that philosophy is a way of bringing something that's hidden out in the open, and that in that sense that being has intelligibility of and beyond our own consumption of it, is that loss of that sense is nihilism. And so I think philosophy is one of the few ways that people can actually come into that understanding of being through the act of philosophizing. And so that's why I think it's so striking that that what you're actually offering is something that's outside of or different or other than nihilism in ways that people probably can't even know to articulate.
I mean, look, one of the things that maybe you could turn off your microphone. I get an echo.
Okay. Yeah.
One of the things that's strange is having to explain what it is that philosophy achieves. Philosophy is not some strange abstraction. Philosophy is not. Philosophy is an articulation of actuality, of Wirklichkeit, or if you like, reality, which is now the term most often used. And not just that, it articulates the way we access the world, right? Without philosophy, we don't have access to the world, to what it means to be on as well. And nihilism is, I mean, so when you look at someone like Nietzsche, nihilism for Nietzsche is one of the results of the death of God, but also of a Christian morality that wanted to deny life. That's the first consequence of morals. And the last consequence, morality wants to deny everything, and denying life, and that means to deny suffering, etc. That is, for Nietzsche, that's nihilism, and it leads to an utter destruction. And the nihilism that he sees is that it will be he says it will be the history for the next 200 years. But now on what you just said a bit more, philosophy is not, I will say it again, it's easier to say what philosophy is not something that arbitrarily we can choose to do or not to do. And Heidegger says this quite often. He says, whether we have heard of certain thoughts or not does not matter. And as Nietzsche says in Zarathustra, thoughts that come on dove's feet guide the world. These are almost silent thoughts. They guide the world. I mean, I would probably, here's an outrageous claim. Most people will never have heard of Descartes. Certainly, people who listen to to you on this channel, they will have heard of René Descartes, and of Cartesian subjectivity, etc. But most haven't, and still, that's the self understanding of most people in the West and now beyond. And if your self understanding is, even if you haven't articulated it like this, that I am the positing ego of in my world, and I'm looking for certainty, and that I can posit that certainty over the world, over objects and over the world, then I'm simplifying things, then I'm a Cartesian subject, even without ever having heard of this name, because I'm simply, as Heidegger would put it, thrown into this history that I have to accept as my own. And what we can learn from a thinker like Nietzsche is that we are, really he says the desert is growing, right? And someone like Nietzsche, who does not have the releasement of Heidegger, who's gelassen and about letting go, especially at old age, he would probably run around screaming when he could see what we're doing, because he said, no, we have to transvalue all values. We cannot come back to a Christian morality without Christianity, right? So the entire neuroscience nonsense about let's reduce suffering, etc. That to Nietzsche, that's just Christianity in disguise. And he's also the death of God of which he speaks. And Nietzsche wants to find a way of affirming life. And here's a beautiful, what does life mean for Nietzsche? Life, he says, is everything that we are, including our shadows, and everything that hits us, that meets us, that affects us, if we are able to transfigure all of this into light and flame, that's a direct quote, then that's life. So what is supposed to be affirmed with Nietzsche is this profound sense of suffering, and then hopefully be able to move through nihilism in this manner, and artistically so as well. So perhaps, to bring this back to the beginning of this dialogue, there is a certain artistic element to what I do, I would say, which, as you know, I'm a musician. I don't know if anyone, maybe I'll put this up. Here's my guitar. I don't know if actually the camera is good enough. So I make music, and it's, it is quite liberating actually to, you have to turn on your microphone again, sorry.
And you write poetry.
Yes, I write poetry, I write songs, I play guitar. I'm teaching myself how to play the piano. So, you have to blame the lockdown for that. It's going to be so I make music under a pseudonym. And it's the strange thing is this: I always felt that there is something overarching about technology. The more Heidegger you read, and the more Nietzsche you read, and others, you realize, the way out of the cave is to go deeper into the cave. So the way out of, there is no way out of technology. I mean, one of the best examples is Ted Kaczynski. I mean, he was so right, and he's becoming a hero again, for which I would not support. All he ever thought about, he was so anti that he became, I don't know, did he actually kill someone? I mean, he sent, he became quite violent, and all he thought of was technology, right? What were technological tools? So he was completely unfree in his relationship with it. Nietzsche says somewhere in the unpublished or the posthumously published notebooks that the Übermensch is the one the overman is the one who is ready and ripe to deal with technology. And I realized over the years that, you can get you down. because then you're, you know, as you know, it's a death by numbers. You're evaluated the entire time. And especially also when you have just, you know, but then I realized by going through, by just weirdly enough uploading a few videos on YouTube and not caring about numbers, like how many hits, how many likes, how many, doesn't matter. None of it matters. What matters is there's a genuine project that needs to be articulated and then shared. And that usually leads to something, if it's not completely nothing, right? And so it's very playful, this whole thing. And this is what I'm learning again with reading Nietzsche now, is this, you know, the playful attitude towards life, which is for him the Apollonian in the mix with the Dionysian, right? So we are playing with these tools. You are doing this as well, obviously. But only to almost, you know, we can almost say increase our freedom or liberate ourselves more, and not letting us get down or be ruled by it. So I find that very exhilarating. I find it really fascinating that this is what, because, you know, you could just look at these things the entire time and be kind of be dominated by the machine.
Yeah.
But I mean, no one, when they started YouTube, I mean, no one thought that this would happen. I mean, it was for cats. Let's just be, you know, it was, people were uploading cat videos. That was.
Yeah, totally. It's totally rogue, right? They were the beginning. They were the beginning internet philosophers, and they would just go at each other. It was apparently it was pretty ruthless. The guy, Corey Anton, is one of the first people who got on there and started talking about philosophy, and he talks a lot about that. I've had him on the channel a couple of times, but you know, I want to go back to something that you said, that about this connection between, there's something about philosophy and art, right? And especially making art, that has they come from a similar root of some kind. And I have to say, I was struck by, in writing, so this was my first venture into writing kind of an academic like paper. I went to art school and all that stuff. I never really I just never was, that never was asked of me. So I wasn't sure exactly how this was going to go, but I was quite struck that it felt almost exactly like painting and sculpting. It almost felt exactly like that. And why I say that, a particular part of it, because if you ask people who aren't painters and sculptors and stuff to think about like a studio of people painting, let's say, usually they have a tendency to think they picture people with paintbrushes painting on a canvas. But actually, if you go into an actual painting studio, you know, and I went to one of the best art schools in the world, like the most avant-garde, you know, ones in the world. And what you saw was not people painting, but you saw people standing back and looking at their painting from different angles and going like this and listening to some kind of obscure classical music, right? And then every hour or so, they may come up and just do one little brush stroke and they sit back, right? And it's very little actual painting, as in, right, creating in that sense. And is much more of a sense. And I really get this. And I think people who do art will you know, if they look, they'll probably agree, is like, it's more like you're in a relationship where the authority is the painting, and the stroke, that you always have an idea for like some idea of what you want the stroke that you the next stroke to do what you think it wants to do, but then it pushes back, and there's an intelligibility in the painting that's never exactly what you actually put down, and you have to contend with that. And I found that to be the case. The same sense about writing this paper is, I get clear about something, I'd write a sentence down to articulate it, and then in writing it, I realized something wasn't totally complete, or that it highlighted something that I didn't mean it to, but actually that said something.
That's why there cannot be learning outcomes. Right? So that's why, I mean, if you give learning outcomes at the beginning of a philosophy class, you have destroyed thinking. Then what you do is exactly this. oh, the Apollonian, that's the rational, and the Dionysian, that's the irrational. Here's your schema, and now operate with that, right? And Heidegger is all about concealment, and that's with unconcealment, another schema. No, get rid of these schemas. Once you start reading a book by a text by Heidegger on aletheia, you have to begin to think. And once you start reading Nietzsche's Birth of Tragedy, birth. What I'm realizing as I'm writing this now is that Nietzsche is all about birth. He wants to help. You're a great reader of Rilke, right? Rilke speaks of the arrow and the bow and the tension and the elegies in the beginning. We read this together.
Yeah.
The second elegy, first elegy. And so what you realize is, once you start reading The Birth of Tragedy, you have to think with him. There is no schema of rational against irrational. No, the Apollonian is, if you begin to think it through, what is it? It's a dreamlike atmosphere within which there is still measure and limitation. So you're already beginning to think in a certain way, and you get rid of schemas. There is no, and this is the same when there's a genuine writing. I mean, you could write a philosophical academic essay, which is just, in this essay I will argue that P, and then you put everything into that Procrustes bed. But that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to articulate with Nietzsche. We're trying to articulate life and existence, and this is why I really love these posthumously published notes by him. So there are some of those have been translated into English, but not in the, I have to be very strict again, not in the proper sense, because they're not chronologically done as the edition. What I will do for the course is I will translate a lot of those, and they will be in the lectures. So here's one of them on the death of God, because it reminded me, that's why I wanted to mention it when you mentioned the common root of poetry and philosophy. So he says, what if at some point, as we have killed God, which is the holiest, the most powerful, the mightiest of all, how can we find solace if once a human being actually begins to realize what it means to have killed God? And then he asks, must he, that means, how does someone like this find solace and cleanse himself? Must he not be, or must he not become himself the almightiest and holiest poet of all? So there is in Nietzsche the call to poetry. Of course, he's Greek, so he knows Greek, so he knows that poiesis, where we get the word poetry from in English, is one way of generating a world, and that's what Nietzsche is about, right? The life affirmation is about generating a new world, is about generating a new world that could lead over and beyond the last man. And the last man fits in nicely with instrument.
Oh, lost your sound. Okay, you're back.
Oh, can you hear me again?
I can hear you now. You're good.
Okay, sorry. So I don't know where I was. Where did it stop?
The last man. You're going to translate a special. Here for the first time, translated in English by Live.
No. I mean, this is so what I mentioned here was that the human being who finally realized that God is dead will have to become an extremely powerful poet, and that means someone who is able to generate a world, or meaning, almost, you could almost say. And of course that's got problems attached to it, but here the last man is actually, to come back to something you said before, is one of instrumental rationality, is because all that matters for the last man is an increase in an extended material happiness.
Yeah.
And it's about extending, right? Extending the years that we live, prolonging life. Whereas Nietzsche, being a good Greek, is about an orgiastic explosion of high culture just for a moment. But also, it's one of the things I just love about Nietzsche is this. He says in Twilight of the Idols, the worst question that we can ask a young man today is which career or which profession or which job. As if, he continues, by the age of 23, one were already finished. And then he goes on to say, one is a child at 30 in high culture. So, you read, that's nowhere to be found, that you're still young, that there's still time, and time to develop and find and explore, rather than, and for him, that's a sign of decay, of nihilism too, right? This kind of the busyness and having to produce and over-researching, over-analyzing, historicizing everything. So it's making available the world, because you mentioned nihilism. Making everything available is itself a nihilistic approach, because it destroys the beauty of the world. And what is it that a poet does? Let's come back to maybe what Heidegger says. What is it that a poet does for Heidegger, or a painter? A painter for Heidegger does not represent anything. A good painter brings forth a world. Let's shine something that's literally there, but often covered over.
Right. Just that sense of bringing forth, right? I hear in that that is, on one level, it's a completely different way of perceiving, right? Because I think most of our worlds are produced, right?
Yeah.
But this sense of bringing forth the world, just that place of coming from with something, right? It seems to presuppose, I hear in that there's something hidden, there's something concealed, and that which is most concealed is probably demarcates, not it's whether or not it exists or not, right? But a kind of intelligibility that with gumption, with devotion, with a certain attitude, you can start to bring forth, right, into unconceal a world that on some level, I think Heidegger would say it's the difference between something being produced and the sense of being something being accomplished, right? That the produce is really tied to produciere, which is tied to cause and effect. Whereas to accomplish something, I think this is in the letter on humanism, where he says that to accomplish is to bring something into the fullness of its essence and to bring it forth into its appearing light. And you can only accomplish that which is already there. And that which is already always there is being, right? So just in that sense of artistic bringing forth the world is an understanding that I think is because, I mean, it's rapidly disappearing. Like it's disappearing from the intelligibility that people wake up into, right? And the frame that people live inside of. One of the things that's striking to me about nihilism is that it makes no account for itself, right? That it doesn't occur for people that they're nihilistic. And I think doesn't this get into the difference, because there is a difference between what Nietzsche calls nihilism and what Heidegger calls nihilism, isn't there?
Yeah.
Can you speak to that a little bit? I think that may be interesting.
I mean, it depends on. So, I mean, if you come from Heidegger, how he interprets Nietzsche and nihilism in a nutshell, it's nothing with beings. So beings themselves lose their meaning and they become nothing. Yeah. And that is almost, consequential to some trajectory of metaphysics, not all of it. So it's not that all of metaphysics is purely nihilistic or anything, but there is an oblivion of negativity and of the nothing, of nihil, as well.
Yeah.
And with Heidegger, what he calls, in actually in his Nietzsche book, in the second volume, he says that there is an authentic nihilism, an eigentlicher Nihilismus, and that's the following. That's one way. So that's the thinking that arriving at being means at the same time being able to let go of it. For that which one wishes to grasp is withdrawing. And that's the thought of being itself, and in neighborhood of the nothing.
Yeah.
But for Nietzsche, it's concerned really with the world, with beings. So as he says, for example, in the fifth book, let me find it, of the Gay Science, in section 346, I think, he says at the end, so there's he says there's a terrifying either or which is now upon Europeans, which is the following, and I'm translating from the German: either you abolish your own ways of honoring God, etc., or you abolish yourselves. And he says the latter would be nihilism. But he's got other ways. So the abolishment of the world, that would be nihilism. He's got other ways of speaking about nihilism. So he speaks of an active nihilism. He speaks of an incomplete nihilism. He speaks of passive nihilism. So a passive nihilism is, as he says, that's a sign of weakness. The force of spirit is tired, and no longer does it find any, or it finds its aims or goals and values that it had up until now, spirit, utterly inappropriate, and does not believe in them anymore. And that's a passive nihilism. An active nihilism, as he says, can be a sign of strength, and this is what he wants. And Nietzsche says nihilism cannot be avoided. It is the history of the next 200 years. And he says somewhere, and Heidegger, for example, quotes this, and Jung quotes this as well, that nihilism is the unheimlichste Gast, the most unhomely, the most uncanny guest at the doors of Europe. And then he asks, whence does he come? Whence does nihilism come? And there's no way with the death of God around nihilism. It means that the horizon has been wiped away, as he says in the Madman section, in the third book of the Gay Science. But at the same time, this can be, of course, liberating. It's like the Father is gone, right? That it can be liberating. But what must occur in between is a striding through nihilism. The last man does exactly the opposite. The last man says, well, yeah, the world is nihilistic. Nothing means anything. It's all arbitrary, but it doesn't bother me because I dwell in my happiness and I keep increasing my materialistic happiness. And so, lightning has struck, right? And lightning has struck a long time ago. That nihilism is real, and it's been that you could look at many different isms as containment strategies against nihilism. And of course, nihilism can also become a consumer good. I mean, we have to be very careful not to turn it into something. Look at Nirvana. Nirvana is one of the best examples. On the one hand, this band from Seattle and the entire scene surrounding it, the grunge kids from that. From suburbia Seattle, they had something to say, and they were angry. They were angry with the 80s and whatever came before and what happened to the hippie parents. But it immediately, their movement became sucked into the machine, right? I live 10 blocks away from where Kurt Cobain shot himself. And it's always been striking to me that what is they get famous with a song that's called Smells Like Teen Spirit. That's an interesting title.
Yeah.
And then they sing, Here We Are Now, Entertain Us.
Yeah.
So you see, it doesn't really step out of it either. So it remains still within. Obviously he's cynical here, right? Here we are now, entertain us. He's cynical, but that's itself. So there is some an energy, there's some force, some artistic force, but it takes still too seriously this life of the last man, and hence gets sucked into it. And that's Nietzsche sees. I think with Nietzsche you can begin to see all of this. Why some and then this is why you know this that my academy is called Halcyon Guild Academy. The idea is to come back to the old guild model where we have masters in their field who come together and then teach or converse or hold some kind of a conference or something, and simply carry forth a certain way of teaching. It's a loose organization that provides some protection and some guidance, and it's called Halcyon. I pronounce it in the Greek way, Halcyon. I think in English it would be with a C officially, Halcyon. And that's Nietzsche very often speaks of the halcyon bird. And if I may, maybe I'll open this just briefly on my phone, because I don't want to. I've got a weak internet connection. So here's a quote from Nietzsche: "That which is really noble in a work or human being is the moment when their sea is smooth and they have found halcyon self-sufficiency." And another, so the halcyon bird is the iceberg, the kingfisher. And the kingfisher bird, you've heard of this bird, right? So let me just say, we Halcyonians, we Halcyonians are devoted to, quote from Nietzsche, light feet, wit, fire, grave, grand logic, stellar dancing, wanton intellectuality, the vibrating light of the south, the calm sea perfection. The tone of what I'm aiming, and there is a melody to it. I'd like to play a melody in what I do and what we do together, for example, right? That is aspiring to this halcyon tone, to this harmony of the halcyon, which is what. So the kingfisher, the icebird, breeds in winter. In a period when the sea is calm, knowing that the sea won't be calm for very long. So by the law of the eternal recurrence of the same, even these horrors that are about to unfold in January weather in the Mediterranean Ocean have already been overcome. It's a very different temporality. It's like you begin to remember the future as the past. That's and the halcyon tone is exactly light feet, with moving beyond that which is now, taking the seriously the overman is a bridge, moving over, because to come back to the Nirvana example, as much force and energy, and they had energy, didn't they? As much as that was there, it got corrupted because it was too focused on that which wasn't right now. But that's it. So it becomes a play of the last man mentality itself. It must move over and beyond it, and that's exactly what Nietzsche says in the Zarathustra. I think that's one of my the chapters I love the most in Zarathustra is in German vom Vorübergehen, which in English usually is of passing by or passing over or moving on, depending on the translation that you have. But if you hear the Vorübergehen, you can hear the Über of the Übermensch. So it is really over, to go over and beyond. And here's something that happens here. Zarathustra comes back to the city. This is in the middle of the book. This is in the third book. And meets someone who sounds like him. In the beginning, you think this could almost be Zarathustra. And this is someone who, but then you realize, no. The tone here is different. You begin to realize the tone is cynical, right? It's like Diogenes. Oh, look at me. You know, I'm looking for a human being because apparently you're the only one who is. But you know, the funny thing about Diogenes is, and I said this to a private student this week, is Diogenes is so focused on the polis and on everyone on the market square that he's completely dependent upon it, right? And so he becomes cynical because no one else is as good as Diogenes. No one is good enough for you. And this is what this copycat of Zarathustra begins to sound like, very, very cynical. And Zarathustra says at the end, you know, he says, Nietzsche never has any compassion, but there he lets Zarathustra say, you know, I feel pity for you. And then he says, where you can no longer love, there you shall move over and on. You shall move on. You must go over and beyond. And that's to me, that's a way of, you know, aspiring to this completely different understanding of what the Overman, the Übermensch is, and this different tone. It's, you know, Nietzsche or Zarathustra never condemns the city. He doesn't like it. He doesn't enjoy life in the city and in the market square. But he doesn't say, you know, let's burn it to the ground, or you're all idiots. But he has his moments where he can be, you know, very cynical and full of resentment too, but not in the Zarathustra. And so it's really because what's one of the biggest problems of nihilism now is, if this period is nihilism, is of course resentment, right? Revenge, wanting to tear down instead of wanting to build. We need a will to build a world that's meaningful and that makes sense and brings something forth, rather than, you know, all these different terms, like the rat race. The way I grew up, this is going to be personal, the way I grew up was, you know, almost this kind of, it's going to be terrible when you're old because you have a job and it's just a nightmare to work for a corporation. And so, you know, you enjoy your youth now, which just means getting drunk, I guess. And then you move on, and that's just going to be, it's weird that we have to, why, right? If no, I mean, let's use these forces for liberation. And not to have, you know, an extended, you know, decades long existence, no, but to bring some spark into the world.
This sense that what you said, resentment, is what characterizes the time of nihilism, is resentment. And so there's something really interesting going on in the United States right now, right? With this rioting that's happening, like in the Northwest and stuff, it's unclear who exactly they're writing against, right? There's these big things, but there's an argument about what they're banding together and protesting against. Like, that's just that it's a question, right? You start to think, well, what is the resentment that they're enacting out for? I think it's almost like it's a resentment for being resentful, right? The object of the resentment is almost second nature, but there's a deep, it's funny, I haven't really thought about it in these terms, but
look, there's something profound happening, which is, which, I mean, we are pushing towards a future that is increasingly just a black wall. And it is strange to be of the Occident, to be Western, and looking back on thousands of years now of an extended history, right? I mean, Homer, the Greeks, the Romans, and whatever else. As Americans would say, all this stuff.
Yeah.
But so this extended history, Nietzsche says this is going to be a massive problem to be that historical. And for him, the contradiction is this, or the trouble is this: without history, we are just animals. That's what he says in The Use and Abuse of History for Life.
Yeah.
But with only history, without anything ahistorical, that can destroy us as well. And he makes this distinction between the antiquarian, the critical, and the monumental. And the critical, so the monumental historian, the monumental historical human being, looks at history and is capable of pulling out that which is life affirming. And again, that means to be able to turn everything into light and flame. And of course, in flame, you hear the pur aietsuon of Heraclitus, the ever-living fire, which with Hegel is spirit itself, right? So it's turned into light. And light means guidance. It means opening. Again, it's about building. That's the monumental. It's life affirming in the sense it sets strong values that affirm life, and that always means including suffering. Now, the critical historian does not accept suffering, but looks back and can only find resentment. And of course, where that resentment for Nietzsche, he's a good psychologist, is not being able to live up to the ideals of some other time or for the public good. That's hard. And it's much easier to just follow base desires that come and go, and to destroy. But destruction is not infinite, right? Destruction has a certain limit to itself. It's like a fire. You can have wildfires, and they can burn very long. They can destroy a lot in their way, but they will burn out.
Right.
And then they're out. And then they're just out, right? And that's a different fire than the ever-living fire from Heraclitus. We have to be careful with that example here. But yes, so it's Zarathustra, and he says though too, one of the things that this is a quote I actually put in the syllabus because it's so prescient. This is from Zarathustra, and I wanted to read the official translation. I mean, one of the chapters begins with the following quote. Wait a second. Too far into the future did I fly, dread fell upon me. So that's one. And here's another one. Not only the reason of millennia, their madness too is breaking out within us. It is dangerous to be an heir. So Nietzsche does see us on this precipice, on this cliff, on this edge, the edge against the future, where a lot could be breaking out all of a sudden that may have been contained, and that may have been contained by, as he would put it, the Christian moral hypothesis.
Right.
And that's why it's becoming so extremely important for him to set and find new values that are life affirming, and not themselves deeply nihilistic. I mean, destruction is just always deeply. This is exactly what he describes nihilism as is abolition, right? It's abolishment. And I mean, and of course also, what you can learn from this passage from Vorübergehen, of passing, of moving on and beyond, where the copycat of Zarathustra, the cynic, that's a resentful, driven, lost little demon. Well, what does this little copycat really need?
Yeah.
He needs the city he loathes,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So without, because what the one thing that's not a thing. What this copycat Zarathustra could not do, he could not turn away from it. He couldn't let go. He cannot let go. He must. The city must exist, and it must exist as something that he can endlessly criticize and rail against.
Yeah.
And that gives meaning, right? I mean, an anti-identity can be an identity.
Yeah.
But this is what it is, though, right? It's looking for meaning. It's giving meaning.
Yeah. Hang on one second. I need to pause this and switch to a light socket. My power is going low. Resume. All right. Thanks for pausing for a second. I had to find a light socket.
Yes. So just to reiterate, the ape of Zarathustra, as he calls him, the copycat, will forever be directed against the city, the polis that he wishes to destroy.
Yeah.
That's his identity. That's who he is.
Yeah.
And that's the cynical, with Nietzsche, that's the cynical critical historian who cannot affirm life.
Yeah.
It's always about a struggle against something.
Yeah.
And never about giving birth. I mean, Nietzsche is I find it more and more, is about giving birth and letting go of the tension. He's shooting towards the future.
Yeah. Yeah. Playfully, joyfully.
Yeah.
Reverently. It's interesting that as you're talking about Nietzsche, I could tell that you're in this writing and in this course that you're doing. You've got these are thoughts that I'm hearing you talk about with Nietzsche that I haven't heard before. I can tell it's going deeper for you with him. But listening to you, I keep flashing to Burning Man, which on some level I have always had this sense. And Burning Man is this festival that goes on up in literally the middle of nowhere, like the Salt Flats in Nevada. And I think it's been going on since like 1985 or something, or 1989. The first time I went was 1995. And it's literally what it is there's nothing. It's the most nothing place on the earth. Like it's the Salt Flats that you see on the commercials where they drive the cars. It's like at that place. And for no reason, every 4th of July, the week of that 4th of July, people at this point, 50,000 or 100,000 people show up and build a city with a wooden man built that at a certain time burns. And it's just, and it's just rows of these camps. And these camps are all these, it's really interesting to think about. It's so meta. It's so funny. It's a lot of these camps are basically mocking or making up essentially modernity, right? Like, so you'll have like somebody will do a camp on, say, the church, like the Church of Trump, right? And then people play out some characters of, what a Church of Trump would be like, right? And then, in the middle of it, you'll have like the Republican convention, right? On acid or something, and you have all these people play acting and making fun of in these elaborate ways. I mean, just brilliant artistic accomplishments of basically making fun of people who are pretending to do things meaningfully. And then at the midnight or whatever, when the man burns on that Sunday, like it does every year, the whole thing surrounds this. And it's like, probably, I have to say, it's arguably, you could say it's the most religious experience that humanity's ever experienced. As this man burns, people are just out of their minds and kind of Dionysian frenzies. And it's like nobody really believes metaphysically that the man represents anything. If anything, it represents whatever's meta from all of that. And there's this humongous relief, and people walk away. I'm in San Francisco, so I'm at the center of the people who basically produce it. So it's like I'm around people that go to that.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times I've heard people talk about life. Life was one way, and then they went to Burning Man, and then they came away, and like life was completely different after that. And I think one of the things I've always and so hearing you talk about the Nietzsche's perspective on nihilism and the way that he talks about that, it almost sounds like something about that festival. I doubt it was conscious, but there's something about that festival that seems like almost like an epitome of playfulness, right? Of seeing through the aristocratic bullshit and like all of and making fun of it, right? In these really meaningful, felt sense ways that I can't imagine that there being more, 30, 50,000 people around a Burning Man going crazy, are all of them in euphoria. Like, I don't know if there's ever been a religious event like that.
Yeah, it sounds Dionysian.
Yeah.
I've not been, but the way in which Nietzsche describes Dionysus or the Dionysian is the Olympic gods are self-contained, and Apollo especially, the god of light and the god of measurement, the god of self-knowledge as much as of dreams, provides a justification of the world, provides a justification of life. And from Asia, says Nietzsche, Dionysus rushes in and threatens to destroy the Olympic gods, and also threatens to destroy the individual. And because the Dionysian is this utter destruction of the individual, and just shows the absurdity of existence, shows the absurdity of suffering, that everything is already that death dwells in everything that exists. And this almost destroys the Olympic gods. However, they welcome him in and make them one of their own. And for Nietzsche, however, you cannot have just the Dionysian. To have just the Dionysian would be that, even though there is here, there's a reconciliation, as he says, between man and nature, and man and beast, that is not in itself enough. It requires always both. What Nietzsche calls der große Stil, the grand style, is always the Apollonian together with the Dionysian, never just Dionysus. So only that would not be artistic. It would not be tragic. It would just be orgiastic, or too much of an orgy. And both together, that's what generates the great style. And that means measuredness, measurement, self-knowledge, but not in a Socratic sense. So a Socratic sense would mean to have total transparency over yourself and know everything. No, the know thyself of the Oracle of Delphi is to know your limits and what you're not supposed to know about yourself. And so that measuredness, and also, what you're not supposed to ask, about existence, because there are limits to what a human being can stand.
Yeah.
I mean, history might be too much for some to bear. Right? Nietzsche actually literally says this. He says, history, just the knowledge of history destroys the weak. That's a quote from Nietzsche. But it always requires both. So the highest form of existence for Nietzsche is when the Apollonian and the Dionysian come together in a measured way, so that there is on and not in a, he says, not in a back and forth. So it's not, the Apollonian now and then some Dionysian. No, both at the same time, each in their own right, nebeneinander her. That means next to each other, parallel. And that's for him, that's the greatest achievement to get to as an artist, for example.
Yeah.
To be able to be at this level. And to some degree you could say, it requires some organization with this particular festival. So maybe it comes together. I've not been, so I can't speak to it. But yeah, and there's the what we so benignly call leisure, skole in Greek, in ancient Greece, that was very often orgiastic. I mean, these, also the philosophical dialogues, the symposion means to drink together and to let the spirit of the wine, which is Dionysian, take over to some degree, but not only. And that's, so it's this, and this, of course, to some degree it's been, because we live in a very compartmentalized existence, right? So that's your weekday, that's your weekend, that's where you do this, that's where you do this. So it's a fuller way of being would not be Burning Man 365 days, but would be where all of this comes together, and it comes together naturally almost, right? So I can't really, I'm thinking about, what would a Nietzschean world look like? That's what I'm thinking about. And I have to think about this a bit more. Maybe I'll say something, maybe not, but yeah.
Right, totally. Well, it just also seems that there's, there's that quality of, if you speak to like, well, why would you engage in philosophy? Why would you read philosophy, right? Is it the act of genuinely considering is opening up to what's hidden, right? That in the sense that there's something of value in what's hidden. And I would say that it seems to me that I would imagine something of, so when I imagine a Nietzschean world, what would a Nietzschean, that's an interesting question. What would a Nietzschean look like? I just get the sense that it has a lot of relationship to possibility, right? That there be a kind of, I don't know if an exaltation, but the sense of that something grabs your interest, or a possibility speaks to you, that you have that there be some kind of almost in all the levels of love relationship to that, following that, and letting it articulate you as you articulate it, and the exuberance from possibility. I would imagine it would have a lot to do with that, like the future speaking to you, right? And letting yourself be. And I would have to say that actually has been, I think, in reading Heidegger, right, in these conversations, if they're a training for anything, it seems like that's what they're a training for, right? Is to just continually be open to that you're inside of a horizons of intelligibility that are concealed to you, and that they can address you, right? If you can start to hear them. And I think that that's part of what came through in developing and circling was very much like the influence of Heidegger wasn't so much about like making a practice that was a Heideggerian practice explicitly. It was more like grappling with Heidegger allowed me to start to see phenomenologically. And that seeing phenomenologically happens to be what a big part of how circling unfolded, right? and speaking and being able to listen to people who are always, and it's like kind of getting the sense that people, whenever anybody's alive, they're in response to an understanding of being, right? And so listening to somebody isn't so much listening to them, right? It's as it is listening to what they're responding to, right? And having a conversation that's about what's unconcealing, what's addressing them, right? And then they put it in terms of like, oh yeah, I feel really seen by you, or I feel really understood by you, or something like that. But it's not exactly understanding them like an object that by which they understand. It's more like, no, listening to them is really, as they're speaking to something, and then to really listen is to hear what they're responding to, and have it come forth to both of you. And that usually is some version of what we end up talking about, is some possibility that's either closed in which it's affecting them, or some possibility that's opening up, that's challenging them in some level. That's usually what the conversation ends up being about, right? So I would imagine that like a Nietzschean world would have something to do with an exalted or attuned relationship to possibility and flow states.
Well, he says, you know,
We could hear
when you think of the
closing his eyes, listening into the hidden.
when you think about, what is it that's occurring? What's occurring is the most frightening earthquake, and that's the death of God. This isn't some, you know, benign event. This is something that we, as he says, we only have to begin to even be able to wake up to, that this has occurred. And this, so there's a sense of horror, right? And Nietzsche speaks of the horror vacui, the horror of emptiness. Rather than not wanting at all, the human being wants nothing. And Nietzschean, I mean, and then the will to power, if you take it seriously, is not just about some, you know, someone taking power or political power. No, it means that there's a field, a force field of insane power that we can call, if you want, that's one other name for what we call modernity, and that we are now tapping into. And that's how we run these machines, right? By extracting vast amounts of power and energy from previously hidden sources, and channeling them. And at the same time, what begins to occur seems to be also some sort of a weird sameness and turning around and around itself, a repetition. So we are responding to the will to power and the eternal recurrence of the same in a way that is purely technical, instrumental, but not artistic. If we were to respond to it artistic, then they can be liberating. Then we are not. You know, why do people speak of the hamster wheel or the rat race? That kind of that. And Nietzsche, by the way, in the posthumously published notes somewhere in 1887 or so, he says, this is a quote, direct quote, "What's inevitably in store for us today," and that's what the first lecture is about, is the total economic management of the earth. So, what else? He also says that what's upon us is the installment of an unhomely, uncanny wheelwork with ever more finely adapted wheels, where the human being is reduced to that wheel. And that's the instrumental, rationalistic response to the will to power, which Heidegger then will call the will to will, right? Which is another name for cybernetics, positive feedback loops that can incorporate all negativity and turn even those positive again. And then, of course, then the question becomes, well, what's the exit? Right? This is something that many people ask. What's the exit? How do you get out? Because there is this sense of repetition, of sameness. And that lies somewhere in yeah, I mean, you could say possibility. It lies somewhere in going over and beyond, which you could think of as possibility, and then becoming open to this entirely other dimension, which also, you know, which is possible, and which we can begin to, as he sometimes uses this image of the ship of sailing towards new shores, and then the eternal recurrence of the same is no longer crushing, but becomes something liberating, because in every moment, and that's what's so brutal about it, but that it can become liberating, because for Nietzsche there's no way out of necessity. Everything is always necessitated, right? That's amor fati. Amor fati does not mean to rationalize, say everything's great. No, it means to appreciate, understand that necessity rules over everything.
Yeah.
And then in every moment that requires a genuine decision in your life, that recurs in the next moment. So if in some moment of decision, right, we become negligent and don't act on our highest, as Nietzsche would put it, our highest instinct or our highest goals, then that will recur. And it will recur in our finite existence forever.
Right.
But once you, but it is, right? It is forever. I mean, one of the clearest ways of saying this is you will be dead forever. I mean, this is your finitude in eternity. Yeah. And it will recur in your finite existence forevermore. And so in the moment that you just described of being, I feel seen, I feel listened to, etc., that can become a moment of making the next moment the highest. And that will recur, so that the next moment is again a highest. And then it's a light play, right? So it's elevating itself because it's recurring within itself. And that's when it becomes meaningful. It doesn't mean that you live forever. It doesn't mean, that's not what it means. But we are trapped in this repetition anyways, right? I mean, even though there is now a pandemic, etc., people work from home, the so-called rat race hamster wheel continues. And why is it that it's described as a wheel? Well, it is an uncanny wheelwork where we are finally adapted wheels. And we are reduced to cannon fodder, or as Marx puts it, a reserve army standing ready to be exploited. But there is, for Nietzsche, there is the possibility, not for everyone, obviously, but for Nietzsche, not for everyone. Nietzsche is not an egalitarian. That should be very clear. For Nietzsche, it's a few who can, and they will be able to live up to this highest in their own being, but it's still in a finite existence. And it is about what, how you find a stance in, to speak with Heidegger, in the midst of beings. And there are consequences to thinking, there are consequences to actions, there are consequences to decisions, because they're not just mere choices, like a consumption choice. It's a judgment, and that judgment leads to another judgment, and that becomes your life. Yeah. And then, of course, the question is, can you affirm it? Here's a beautiful quote from Nietzsche. if you become young when you're old, you will stay young for a very long time. Because some people, the thinking kinds, they are very old and they're very young, as you might know. And here's a slogan. It's not from Nietzsche, but here's a Niederhauser. If you live your own life, it is very long and full-flowing and rich. If you don't, it is very short, and then it must be extended and prolonged, etc. Because that which is there is not coming out.
Yeah.
And you can see it, right? You can see when it's not coming out with people. And that's perhaps also what you're describing about, I feel seen. Because there is
the moment,
something that's coming out all of a sudden. Yeah.
Yeah, there's that moment. Yeah. What's that? You said you are a finitude in eternity.
Yeah, no, you will be dead forever, right? But that's a bit of a joke. But no, but in your finite existence, I mean, think about it. In your finite existence, within that finitude, everything recurs forever.
Yeah.
So you better respond in a way that you can allow this to recur forever. Because how so much of what neurosis and which are or I'm not speaking about severe cases of psychiatric malaise that can befall people. Maybe a neurosis. What is it? It's something that's being suppressed. And it's being suppressed repetitively. Psychologists speak of patterns, right? They speak of, let's break a pattern here. What's your pattern? Let's break it, etc. Well, a pattern that's too. Well, what is it? There's something that being repeated the entire time, and that can be just one decision made once that then repeats itself in every single moment. And psychologically, it's self-fulfilling prophecy. It's a visualization, etc., that can lead to the ever same result, if you like, all the time. But with Nietzsche, or with a philosophy, it's richer because it comes from. It's not just you as a case who's doing something wrong. It has to do with time and how we understand time and what kind of temporality we are in. The temporality that Heidegger will call ecstatic temporality. That's exactly the eternal recurrence of the same, properly understood. Because that which has been is coming towards you, and that becomes your presence. Right? That becomes what gifts itself as the presence. There's a wonderful film called Arrival, where, Hollywood being Hollywood, they have to make it about aliens.
Right.
But they have
It's a profound movie. I love that movie. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that film is about the eternal recurrence of the same, right? And it's about ecstatic time. And what is it that happens to the main character? She begins to remember the future as her past.
Yeah.
By what? By reading and translating a non-propositional, non-linear language.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, look, if it weren't a Hollywood film, it wouldn't be aliens. It would just be a few people sitting down together trying to write poetry like Hölderlin did, and Nietzsche did. That lets you, too far into the future did I fly, dread fell upon me. What some of the spookiest things. Here's something spooky from Heidegger. He says in his lecture course on Plato, on Aletheia, it's up to us as much as to Plato to make sure that Aletheia is not something of the past, but becomes our genuine history. Now take the first half. It's up to us as much as to Plato. I mean, this is extremely weird, right? Because when you listen to this carefully, what he's actually saying is, we can be in the same sphere as this man still, because this way of thinking, and this comes back to what we said before, thoughts that come on dove's feet guide the world.
Mm.
So we can be in these spheres where Plato is still speaking, because these thoughts still move everything. I mean, if you read The Cave and you don't think that that's what we're living in, then nothing can help you. But sorry, but you know, but then but here. So what would a Nietzschean world look like? It would look like you are, you know, kind of led into not a dull universe that's just expanding, but a self-contained cosmos that he says, and as Heraclitus says, also has no beginning and no ending, and you are a finite instantiation of these movements of time where everything will always already have happened.
Yeah.
But we can tap into this, or lean into it, find it, tear it open through a different understanding of language. And then you begin to remember yourself differently. Right? Maybe this is also something that's happening in circling. Is that what does it mean to be seen? It's because all of a sudden you're seen in a different way. But to be seen means to have any sort of like a sense of who you are. How do you have a sense of who you are? Is by remembering who you are. Yeah. But to be seen means to begin to remember yourself differently.
Yeah. Exactly. I just had this thought about like a Nietzschean world is one in which the world becomes, you read the world in such a way, right? That's similar to that, right? Of the text being this alien text, right? This non-propositional alien text. It just struck me of like, oh yeah, it's about to be in a Nietzschean world is to read the world as that kind of a text, right?
Yeah, it's and not just arbitrarily, right? I mean, this isn't about there are these books about Nietzsche's writing his own life, etc. And that's psychologically interesting, and that's biographically important, perhaps. But if you take thinking seriously, then Nietzsche does stand in a certain tradition, and has to wrestle with it, and also sees something about what is coming. I mean, he says at some point, what is coming now is the historical sense.
Yeah.
And that means that Maximes and Reflections, that history is the weight of, Nietzsche also says something, we must be able to forget, to actively forget. Mm-hmm. And because isn't it strange we live in this almost frozen time where you can just gaze back upon the millennia and just pick and choose whatever you darn well wish, you know, some ism here, some piece from over there. And why is this all becoming available? Like the entire planet is a museum.
Yeah. Yes, it could be inventoried, right, and presented.
Yeah. Yeah, we had the inventory before we started this. Yeah, exactly. So you see, you can use something like YouTube to start an inventory channel. Shall we? Here's a philosophical inventory, or you can generate something that's in that sense artistic, Dionysian, but Apollonian as well, because it tries to find its own measure within itself, and let something spontaneously occur. Right? We have no idea. Well, okay, let's talk about Nietzsche, but so we never know what's coming of it.
Yeah.
And there's not much inventory. I'm sorry to anyone who's still listening.
Right, totally. Well, I tell you what, make sure email me what you want me to put on the thing.
Yes, sir.
Any last
yes,
things?
Sir. Thank you very much.
Any last things you want to say about the course? And I'll put all the links in the show notes.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you very much. I look for to you, Guy, and then to everybody else who listened. Yeah, Guy, I think you'll join in sometimes from time to time in seminars whenever you've got the time. And I would be, if people have any questions, they can email me. And yeah, I would be really grateful to have a couple of your listeners too on the course and read some Nietzsche together for the next. It's going to be intense, 7 weeks. So
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
Thanks, sir. Signing off. No, bye. Ciao.